So for the next four chapters, chapter 3, 4, 5, and 6, we're going to learn some really important concepts, the basic formal elements, also known as the formal elements or the basic elements of art. And these are different ways that artists manipulate things like line, shape, space, all these different things to make us look longer at their images. So the basic formal elements of art are line, space, light and color, and those are always together because they affect one another, texture, pattern, and time and motion. And time and motion are also always together because when time passes, things move. So when an artist is constructing or composing a work of art, they are like a musician composing music. They're the plan, the placement, or the arrangement of these basic formal elements in a work of art is called a composition. So at the beginning of this chapter, this is an image by Kehinde Wiley. And Kehinde Wiley, a lot of times what he'll do is he'll be inspired by old master paintings, and then he will for a period of time, what he would do is he would go down the street in Los Angeles or in New York, and he would see young African American men, and he would show them these art books, and he would ask them, like, how would you like to be portrayed? So he'd show them these old master paintings. And the reason why he was doing this is because he felt like these men needed to be shown as just as majestic as like these royalties, like perhaps in this Velázquez painting, the Count Duke Olivares, that they were just as worthy as being shown in these positions of honor. So when we're talking about those basic formal, he went to Sri Lanka and India and also talked to men on the street and then painted paintings of them like they were either royalty or religious figures. So, but we're going to talk about this one painting in terms of these basic formal elements. Oops, sorry about this. So, like I said, one of the basic formal elements is line, and there's all sorts of ways of doing line there. And we'll go over these more slowly later on, but for example, there's outline, like the edge of this painting has been outlined. The edge of these leaves have been outlined where the line only goes around the edge and not within the image or the figure of the object. There is line of sight. That happens when someone, either a person or an animal in a painting, is looking out as someone or something else. In this instance, the horse is creating a line of sight to this edge of the frame. In this instance, the man is looking outward at us, which causes us to look at him. Those are line of sight. There are implied lines that happens when something moves toward, points toward, or gestures toward something else, like the sword is pointing toward the tail of the horse. This lance he has is pointing upward to the frame. The horse is creating an implied line, and that it's moving in this direction. An implied line and line of sight, they cause you to look at other parts of the image because we look at what this is moving toward or what this is looking at. And then there's another kind of line called directional line, and directional line is a continuous line, like the edge of the horse goes straight to the man. The edge of his sweatshirt goes straight down to the saddle. And then there's also, that's one form of directional line, and then there's rows of things that create directional lines because we look from one end of the row all the way to the other end of the row. So these are just devices that cause us to look in different places. Then there, in terms of space, there are two-dimensional objects. This background is really flat looking. It only, like the little things within it only possess height and width. They look real flat. They're 2D. And then there's three-dimensional space, real space, like sculptures are three-dimensional, but in paintings and drawings, you create the illusion of something being three-dimensional by using contour lines or shading to depict light. You can also make something look more three-dimensional by using 1 or 2 point perspective. We also talked about light and color, and we'll get into that more, and we'll get into more into pattern, and we'll get more into time and motion later on. But let's just stick with line for right now. So what is a line? There's all sorts of lines. There's lines, like a line is like from point A to point B. These are lines. These are gestural lines. Like line, it's the most fundamental element of art, regardless of whether it's a painting, a sculpture, a print, a photograph. The lines are in everything. There's the lines in the pleats of the curtains. There's the lines in the dresses that move around these figures. There's the lines caused by the rows of building and the rows of waves. So there's all sorts of kind of lines, and we're gonna break them down in a minute. A line can create a two-dimensional shape, like the outline around this horse, a three-dimensional form, like this is an actual three-dimensional horse sculpture made out of pieces of driftwood. Or again, like I said, like you can create the illusion of something being three-dimensional by using shadow and contour lines and depicting like how much or how little light is hitting the surface. It's going to make things look more three-dimensional. So let's talk about those varieties of line. The first kind of line we'll talk about is an outline. An outline goes around the edge of a shape or figure. So it's a line that's drawn around it. It doesn't go within it, it's drawn around it. And so it creates a shape, which is two-dimensional. An outline does not indicate or describe details. It doesn't describe the jaw of the horse, or the eyes of the horse, or the hairs in the tail. It only indicates the outer edge of a two-dimensional figure or object. So this is Susan Rothenberg's work, and she uses outline. She just passed away, by the way, but she used outline in her work, where she did these outlines of these horses. Her source of inspiration for these, she did these in I believe that like the 1960s, and her source of inspiration for these were a series of photographs on motion done by an American photographer, Edward Muybridge. Muybridge was really interested in the motion of people and animals, and he was approached by Governor Stanford of California, who made a bet with a person about whether or not race horses at any point have none of their feet touching the ground. So he knew that Muybridge was a photographer doing this experimental photography, and Muybridge set up a series of cameras. This is before film, and these cameras were set off by tripwires, and he photographed this series of photographs of this race horse in motion, and then they proved that yes, there is a point where none of the horse's legs touch the ground. And so Rothenberg's inspired by him. We'll learn about another artist later on, Sol LeWitt, who was also inspired by the work of Muybridge. So here's some other artists who use outline. One of them is Kara Walker. she does what are known as silhouettes. A silhouette's a dark shape, and it's an outline of someone or something, and it's visible against a lighter background. She does these. There a lot of times have to do with slavery and plantation system and the violence of the slave masters to the slaves. And in the past, when silhouettes first came around in like the late 1700s, early 1800s, the only people that could afford them were rich landowners. So she kind of takes that and gives it to these enslaved people, that was something that was that was reserved for only the rich before. Another artist that uses outline is an artist named Donald Sultan. A lot of times, or some of these early paintings of his were silhouettes, but not done in the same way, the dark shape. These outlines of lemon or fruit set against a dark background. So those are like, these are all outlines. A silhouette is an outline. They only go around the edge of something. They don't go within to show details. I'm really good with this advancing. I keep going backwards. Another kind of line is contour line. This is how it differs from outline. So not only does it go around the edge of something, it goes within, it flows within the object to establish volume and 3D mass. So it gives the illusion of something looking three-dimensional. So I'm just going to read this. So contour lines establish volume and 3D mass. They describe both the outer edge of the object, figure, and form, and I'm stressing and to distinguish them from outlines, they flow within the object or figure or form to establish volume and depict interior details such as wrinkles and muscles and hair, bends and elbows, etc., etc. Contour lines differ from outlines. I know I'm repeating myself, but I really want you to understand this. Outline only goes around the edge of the object. Outlines only create 2D shapes. Contour lines go around the outer edge as well as flow within to create the illusion of 3D mass and volume. They make things appear to be three-dimensional. What is volume? And we'll discuss mass later. So a shape is flat, and if you take a shape and give it 3 dimensions, it has volume. So this is a square and this is a cube. A cube has volume, a square does not. A 3-dimensional form has volume, and then you can simulate this on a 2-dimensional surface. They use contour lines or they use a perspective to create 3-dimensional objects which possess the illusion of volume. So contour lines can be found in a variety of forms. They can be found in paintings. So there's all these, we see all the wrinkles in the men's clothing, and we see the wrinkles in the ship's mast, and the contour lines that go with it, flow within their elbows or their waist or the bends of their knees. So this is like a painting. They can be seen in sculpture. Now, even though a sculpture is actually 3-dimensional, the use of line on the sculpture, like the lines in these hair and this woman's hair, Hagar by Edmonia Lewis, makes it, these are contour lines showing wrinkles, and it makes that already 3-dimensional figure look even more 3-dimensional. So the use of contour line is really ancient. You can look at like ancient, like almost like 2,300, 2,400-year-old Greek vase and platters and stuff like that, and they'll have figures on them that have these contour lines. This is Europa, and there's lines that go within her diaphanous gown, which is see-through, and there's lines that go within, this is Zeus as a bull, that go within that show the bend, like the curve of his neck and the bends of his legs and the hairs in his tail. Here's another instance by Masami Terioka. He did like a series of paintings during the AIDS epidemic in the 80s. This is a geisha whose robe is being pulled off by a fox. They're surrounded by fire, and she's frantically trying to open this package of condoms. So now we're gonna, so that's contour line. Contour line makes things look more three-dimensional. It goes around and flows within the object to describe details. So now we're gonna talk about another kind of line. And these kind of lines that I'm going to talk about now are lines that make you look from one part of an image to another part of an image, because the goal of the artist is to make you look at their painting, their drawing, whatever, as long as possible. So the first kind of line we're going to talk about is a directional line. Directional lines create a sense of direction, leading your eye from one part of an image to another. And there's two forms of these. One is a continuous line. So let me go to an image. It's a continuous line that starts in one place and leads to something else. So this edge of the road starts here and it leads to this walking person. Then this edge of the road continues on until we get to this tree. That's a directional line. Starts in one place, ends when it touches something else. The side of this tree here, we go along the branch, along the trunk, ends when we touch the ground. That's a directional line that leads us from the top of the drawing all the way down to the grass near the bottom of the drawing. So that's one kind of line. Then there's another kind of directional line. These are both directional lines. The first is a continuous line that starts in one place, leads to another. The second kind of directional line is a line that's formed by a row of figures of objects, which make you look from one end of the row to the other end of the row. Call these directional lines, don't call them continuous lines. I just want to say that because I have students on tests that call them continuous lines, and that's incorrect, or in papers, they'll call it that. So the directional line, the second example of directional line, are rows of things. So they're rows of trees that make us look from here to here to here to here and onward. There's the rows, the slats in the fence that make us look from here to here to here to here to here. This row of trees makes us look from here to here to here. So we start on one side of the drawing and we end up on the other side of the drawing by following the rows or slash directional lines. Here's an example of directional line caused by a row of people, the blind leading the blind. It starts at this one man. We follow the road down and we end at this other man who's fallen down. So there's also the continuous line. That's a directional line, and there's rows that are directional lines. That makes you look from one part of the painting to another part of the painting. Then there's an implied line. And what do we mean by implied? An implied line is a suggested line. So a directional line is actual line in its one form. But an implied line is a suggested line. So an implied line is created when someone or something points, gestures, or moves toward someone or something else. So it's like point A is the beginning of that implied line. Point B is where it leads us to. So this woman is running, and the movement, like she's moving toward this man. She's point A, he's point B. This man is running and he's point A, and it leads us to this man. This girl is point A, she's gesturing toward this little girl, which leads us to the little girl. The man's pole on his bagpipe, it points up and leads us to this tree. The bagpipe is point A, the tree is point B. So it's not a line that connects. Like implied line doesn't touch what it's leading toward, but it moves toward, points toward, gestures toward what it is leading us to look at or leading us toward. So there's, well, we won't stop on this, but there's a lot of implied and a lot of directional lines in this, but I'm going to show you some directional lines. The edge of the tree starts here, it leads to the woman. The woman's arm creates a directional line that leads directly to this man. The edge of the table creates a directional line that leads toward this man. And then again, implied line, which we just talked about, is when someone points, his hand's pointing downward, it leads us to the bottom of the image. This man's leg is pointing outward, it leads us to this woman. Those are implied lines. Okay, so the next kind of line. And I don't know why, I do not know why, but so many people get this mixed up with something else, which doesn't make any sense to me. And I'm going to try to make it so you don't get it mixed up. So a line of sight, this has to do when someone is looking towards someone or something else. The word sight should be the hint. Your eyes, your eyesight, that's a hint. Someone looking, sight. Remember that. So this man, he's point A, is looking at this man, point B. This girl is creating a line of sight toward this little girl, and this little girl is creating a line of sight toward her. So this angel creates a line of sight toward this sea creature. This man, he creates a line of sight toward us, which makes us create a line of sight toward him. This guy right here, he's creating a line of sight toward his hands. This guy is creating a line of sight toward that grinder. So a line of sight is when someone is looking at something or someone else. And that someone else can be us, which causes us to look at them. Those are lines of sight. So artists can create lines in certain ways in order to create a sense of movement. So we know this image is not moving, but because of the way the tree is bent and the papers are flying in the air, the paper and the hats, and the way the grass is bent, that is a kind of, because of the way the lines curve, or this kind of directional line with all this paper flying everywhere, and these curves, these directional lines, the curves of the path that lead to the tree, those create a sense of movement. This is by an artist named Hokusai that did a whole series of paintings revolving around the sacred Mount Fuji in Japan. And then this image by, I believe it's by Charlie Russell. Also the way he's drawn the curves in the horse is bucking and kicking that like it's accidentally gotten caught in the fire, and the way the guy's hat is flying off his head, and the way this guy has been like fallen or gotten kicked out of the way with his bent legs. Those also create a sense of movement. The smoke of the flames, the way the lines have been drawn with the flames, also creates that sense of movement. There's a kind of drawing style that has to do with movement, and is a gestural line. And in gestural drawings, like in, like when you're doing a regular drawing, you're just sitting there and you're sitting in your chair and you're drawing and you're just moving your hands. But in gestural drawings, the artist stands back from the paper and uses their whole body. They're moving their arms around to quickly draw the flow and the movement of what is in front of them. I wish you could see my hand, but you can't, so I can't show you. So Leonardo da Vinci, he did a lot of gestural drawings. These gestural drawings are using contour line, but he did them because he's trying to understand the flow of the movement of water, how it moves around, or he's trying to understand how cloth moves around the three-dimensional form of our bodies. So he's moving these lines around. So now we're going to move on to quality of line. There's different ways of using line. And one way is analytical, as well. This is like really well planned and meticulous. And the other is expressive, and it appears to be more spontaneous and like more quickly done and full of movement. So we're going to talk about expressive line first, and we're going to talk about an artist that used expressive line. So with expressive line, this is a Van Gogh painting, there's lots and lots of visible brush strokes or drawing marks. Like, look at all these marks. They're not carefully blended. Expressive line appears to be more quickly executed and more spontaneous in appearance. Like the Van Gogh's not trying to do this like all perfectly, not blending everything all carefully. He's quickly, rapidly painting in these lines. And a lot of times expressive line will be kind of more passionate, be more expressive. It's full of feeling when you look at these paintings. So Vincent van Gogh, here's a sad story. Let me take a sip of water first. So when the year before Vincent van Gogh was born, his mother gave birth to a stillborn child. The child didn't live. And that child was named Vincent. And that child was buried in the churchyard where this Vincent van Gogh's father was a Lutheran minister. So a year later, they had another baby that lived, and they named that baby again Vincent van Gogh. So young Vincent, every day of his life, he walked past the graveyard with the tombstone that had his name on it, Vincent van Gogh. Vincent van Gogh, he's probably would be diagnosed as bipolar now. He was a troubled child. His sister said he barely talked. He never looked up. He didn't draw when he was a kid. He didn't start drawing until later on. His mother, she was probably also bipolar. She was an artist. She had artistic temperament, and she was morose and often depressed. And so he had like a really, not the happiest of childhoods. And when he got older, when he was a young man, he was hired by his uncle. I guess I lied. His mother taught him how to draw. He was hired by his uncle who ran an art dealership, Goipel and Sons. There was one office in The Hague in the Netherlands, and he hired Vincent van Gogh. And Van Gogh, while he was working for his uncle, he fell in love with his landlady's daughter. But Van Gogh was like one of those people that you kind of you don't want them too close to you because you know something's wrong with them, and you kind of back off from them. And the girl, like, she didn't want to have anything to do with him. And Van Gogh like wanted to prove his love, and he went over to their house and he held his hand in a flame and let it burn to show how much he loved her. And they were like, go away. So he was so upset about being rejected that when he went to work and people would come in to buy art, he'd go, why do you want to buy this crap? It's horrible. You don't want to buy this. It's awful. So then his uncle fired him. And then he went through, like, he got a job at a bookseller's and got fired. And he like had a teaching job and he got fired. And then he decided he wanted to be a preacher or minister like his dad. And he went to school, and then like right before he was supposed to graduate, they were taking the Latin exam, and he refused to take the exam because nobody spoke Latin anymore. And then he flunked out of school, and then he finally got a job being like a minister, evangelical minister to a bunch of coal miners in, I think, Belgium. And he was he was just like kind of real self-righteous, and he like always preached and told them to quit drinking, and they didn't like him at all, and they called him Jesus of the coal mines. So then he lost that job, and he's just always like kind of self-sabotaging. He's like difficulty with relationships, but he was this amazing artist. And he after he like lost his job as the evangelical minister at the coal mine, he started drawing and painting, and he took classes, and he these paintings all had to do with like his memories of being working with the coal miners. And in a very short period of time, he did over 900 drawings and 900 paintings, 1,100 drawings. He only sold a single painting in his entire lifetime, and that was to his brother, although he didn't know his brother Theo, who also ran a gallery, bought it from him. So like while all this is going on, after he leaves the coal mine, he goes to Paris to study art, and he gets really influenced by Japanese ukiyo-e prints. So like Japan, up until like right before this time, was like it was really isolated, and they only did trade with people in Asia, Korea, China, and also the Dutch. But then they were forced by the Americans to either start trading with them or go to war. So all these prints, like these paintings and prints by Japanese, flowed into Western Europe. And this particular kind of print is from the Edo period of Japan, which this term ukiyo-e means pictures of the floating world. And a lot of times these prints would be of geishas or kabuki actors, sumo wrestlers, or other forms of entertainment. And Van Gogh was totally inspired by them. And this is a painting he did of a courtesan or a geisha that was more or less a copy of a Japanese print that he saw. He's like really interested in the way they depicted space and the colors they used. He became really influenced. This is another painting that he did like while he lived in Paris. While he was in Paris for a while, he was like really happy because he was in his manic stage, and then he became depressed again. And you can read the chapter, and I really go into it a lot more. And he eventually decided he wanted to go to this part of France that's like was like Avignon, not Avignon, that was Picasso, sorry. This part of France where it was like there were fields and harvest, and it was really lush, and there were beautiful colors. He goes there, and he through his like the generosity of his brother, because Van Gogh had no money, he rents a house, and then his brother starts worrying about him, and he gets another artist, Paul Gauguin, to go keep an eye on him. And while Van Gogh's at this house, he starts like drinking turpentine and eating paint, and he's just kind of going a little nutty there. And for a while, he and Gauguin like painted side by side. They argued all the time. And then Van Gogh starts getting a little like paranoid. And one night after an argument, Gauguin goes out, and then Van Gogh kind of stalks him and like threatens to cut him with a knife. And then Van Gogh's so ashamed of himself, he cuts off his earlobe, and then he presents that earlobe to a prostitute and asks her to keep it for him. So this is a series of paintings by Van Gogh, and you can sort of tell, like after he cuts off his ear, he never poses from this side again, has always posed where the other ear shows. And you can see in these paintings, because of all these lines, expressive lines in him, that he is increasingly becoming more and more manic. And then these are a couple of last paintings he does. I'm not going into his whole history, sorry, but he ends up either, the story is either he shoots himself in a wheat field, or he's annoyed someone so much that they shoot him, and it takes him 3 days to die. So expressive line, it can be found in all sorts of art. It can be found in this is representational painting by Lucian Freud. This is, so it can be in representational paintings that are more realistic looking, more abstract paintings. These paintings of Van Gogh are much more abstract, or it can be found in non-representational paintings. And I believe this is by a Houston artist, Terrell James. So these are all using these expressive lines where they're more spontaneous, they appear more quickly executed. They have, you can see more evidence of lines in the paint, like there's more brush strokes, and they're more emotionally expressive. So analytical line is really different. It's very precise, it's rational, it's often mathematically based, it's devoid of strong emotions, and it's architecturally stable. And by architecturally stable, I mean that the artist will real precisely use, like in this instance, this artist has used 1-point linear perspectives to make these shapes, this masonry and this construction site in the background look more three-dimensional, more representation, although this is an abstract drawing, but they give the illusion of real three-dimensional space. So a lot of times they're very precisely drawn. They're, we don't, like this has got cracks in it because the varnish that was put on here cracked over time. But originally this paint was real carefully blended. We, like Titian in this is trying to show like the effects of light on this subject. Like there's highlights and there's shadows and there's reflective light in the glass. So they're trying to be like really, really precise, well planned out. This is an artist that used, not in this image uses expressive line, but in this later work, he uses super analytical lines. This is Sol LeWitt. He did study art as a child. He was also influenced by Japanese design. He served in the army in Japan and Korea. He was a graphic designer for 17 magazine and for I.M. Pei Architects. I.M. Pei is the architect that designed the Menil Museum in Houston. His early work is abstract and expressive. But then in 1963, he starts making these more, like these more three-dimensional images. They're minimalist, so they use a minimal use of color, a minimal use of shape. They're not, they don't have any, they're devoid of emotion. And he's making these three-dimensional things, but he feels like he's kind of a crappy craftsman. So he starts employing people to cut the wood and metal for him so they'll be more precise. And then his work transitions from like these black and white constructions to, like, he starts removing the skin from these three-dimensional objects and just showing the frames to make them more minimalist. And then, but he's not really happy with this work. So then he starts doing these wall drawings. Like he shows at this Paula Cooper gallery, and she's very brave because you can't sell a wall drawing. Starts doing these drawings on the wall, and then people commission him to do drawings on the walls of their businesses or homes. That's how she and he both make money. And then he starts thinking about, well, you know, like Architects, they come up with the idea, the plan, the concept, but then they hand that over to somebody else. So that doesn't denigrate, make that the architecture any less important than if the architect had built it himself. So LeWitt starts thinking, well, the concept is equal in importance to the actual execution of the artwork itself. So what he starts doing is he starts writing up plans for what he wants a mural to look like. And then he hands that plan over to other people, in this case, people that work in a museum, to execute, to actually paint the mural. When he does this, this doesn't always happen, but he gives credit to the people that executed it. He pays them well for making it. And like this concept, this conceptualism, this concept of the plans, he would give them to school groups, to other groups of people to paint. Sometimes he'll be real precise in the instructions, other times less so, but they're always like carefully measured. The paint is carefully applied. They're real precise. They're well drawn out. So this work of his is, not only is it analytical, but it's conceptual, because he comes up with the idea and the working plan, and then somebody else executes it. So I'm going to show you some paintings that are expressive and analytical. So this painting of this horse, I believe this is by Henri Fuseli. He's Swiss. This is a very expressive painting. Lots of movement, lots of brush strokes. You get this like real feeling of emotion when you look at this. It's more spontaneous, as opposed to this painting by Ong. And Ong used the camera obscura, like we talked about this before, and would project that, like the image of this woman onto the canvas, trace it, and then paint it. And he's like super precise, like blended his paint really well, so you don't see any evidence of brush strokes. He's real careful, like trying to make this look in perspective and three-dimensional, and like the sense of space really correct. And then in this painting, Fuseli's less concerned about having, although there's a foreground, a middle ground, and a background, he's not being super precise in laying it out and figuring it out. It's more spontaneous. This is a painting by Diego Rivera. It's a mural, and it's like people in the foreground are bigger, and they gradually get smaller and smaller. And it's like, look, here's that equilateral triangle that we talked about before. So it's laid out really carefully. The paint's really well blended, and there's some emotion to this, but it's, even though there's a lot going on, it's not chaotic. And then I believe this is a Siqueiros painting, and he's not so concerned about, even though things are drawn in perspective, there's kind of a mix-up of like giant things up front, and then they get much smaller for the back, and the background, it's like everything's more chaotic. There's a lot of emotion. You can tell that people are at war in this, and it is not, even though it is well planned, it is not as stably laid out as this is. It's like more chaotic, and the chaos indicates this battle that's going on, which war is chaotic. Here's some other examples. This is a Sol LeWitt, where these lines are all precisely drawn and laid out. Even though there's a lot of lines, they're measured lines. And this is a Van Gogh, where it's more expressive, and you can see like this multitude of all these different marks, and it's more expressive than this drawing by LeWitt. So just one more time, let's talk about analytical line. A lot of times analytical line will be an equilateral triangle. The planning, the layout of the figures. The analytical line will draw these so that they're like either using 1 or 2 point perspective, so things look like they're actually stably, architecturally laid out and set out in this real 3-dimensional space. They'll be really carefully planned out and drawn. You know, like each of these cinder blocks is the same size. They're not like haphazardly drawn on here. They're carefully measured out. We don't see any brush strokes in this. It's everything's carefully blended to make these objects look 3-dimensional, like the lights hitting them just so. And then there's expressive work that is less precise, more curved lines, more movement, not in that equilateral triangle. It'll be like in a like either an acute or an obtuse triangle that's like more dynamic, because like this is the death of Sardanapalus, and we talk about it in the chapter, where there's lots of curved lines, lots of movement, lots of chaos. Think of that for some types of expressive work. And then think about calmer, less emotional scenes for some types of analytical work. And here, like when we talk about things being analytical and precisely drawn, we have the sketch of the death of Socrates by David that's gridded and well planned out and really precise. And then we have the sketch of the death of Sardanapalus by Delacroix. That's the painting we just looked at. It's got all these curved lines, and really you can't even, like maybe there's this one instance you can see a woman, but you can't even really tell where the figures are from the previous image. Like I don't even see that woman that was drawn in this original sketch. Oh, maybe that's supposed to be Sardanapalus and not a woman there. Maybe changed his mind. So guess what? That's the end of that chapter. And that's chapter 3, part 1 and 2. And I'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.